At long last, the Darius Cozmic Collection has finally arrived in my corner of the globe. I had thought about doing an unboxing video, but let's face it, others have already done so, and really, they can be kind of uninteresting to watch sometimes. As you can see from the snippets, it's really an amazing tribute to the earlier installments in Taito's legendary shooter series, with some excellent pieces included like the book, which looks like quite the amazing read. So what I've decided to do is something a little different, and that's to compare a number of the games featured, at least in the console part of the collection, between the emulation as provided and the same game running off original hardware. This isn't intended as an incredibly detailed examination, but rather a general look of how the games play, how the visuals look, how the controls handle, and things like that. Before we get going, I did want to spend a quick moment looking at one game I can't directly compare with real hardware, that being Sagaia for the Master System. This is simply down to the fact that I don't have the means to run Master System games from original hardware at 60 FPS, which is what this version is doing here. But as a conversion to a more limited platform, it's seriously impressive. For the most part, the Master System can handle the activity on screen because there is quite a lot of it. But as I've spoken about elsewhere in other videos, for me the combination of slowdown and flicker at points can be quite distracting, and it certainly threw me off at points when playing. If that isn't as much of a problem for you, then it's well worth giving it a serious play, even if only to see how an 8-bit system like the Master System can be pushed with a frantic game like this. So for the first real comparison, and it's the US release of Darius 2, named Sagaia for the Mega Drive. With M2 having plenty of experience in emulating the system over the years, both with making the Mega Drive Mini and with various Sega Ages releases, you know for the most part it's certainly going to end up being a pretty good quality result. Which is certainly the case here. Even when using the analog thumbstick of the Switch's Pro Controller for input, I found it quite responsive to play. Though of course, if you're a serious player and wanting to do a serious run, you'll probably want an arcade stick or a controller with a nicer directional pad. But for those who are just using stock hardware, it's at least playable with this way for those using the basics, and the result is pretty good. Unsurprising, the biggest difference I found was in the audio. I wouldn't be surprised if M2's emulation was built around the older Model 1 Mega Drive hardware, and in this case, my capture is coming from the Nomad handheld, which is basically a Model 2. So the collection does offer an advantage here, as you'll hear from the explosions with those screen-clearing bombs, at least from the Nomad's output. On a visual front, this collection offers a variety of choices for scaling. I've gone with fit to screen here to try and mimic some consistency between the original hardware and what you're getting off the Switch feed. And from my eyes, it doesn't suffer from the kind of shimmering that you see on limited hardware and emulation which doesn't offer interpolation, various mini consoles for example. All up, it's a great installment well worth checking out, and the Cozmic Collection includes both this US release that we're looking at, but also the original Japanese version of the game where it was titled Darius 2. So you can compare the differences between the original release and this Western version for yourself. Moving on to the PC engine, and we've got two installments of the series featured here. The first is Darius Plus, a cut-down version of the CD-ROM release Super Darius. Besides the music, you'll also find fewer bosses to deal with, which makes sense for the limitations offered by the smaller size of cue cards. The second release is Darius Alpha, a very limited release which pits you up against the bosses featuring Darius Plus. Having this included is a real neat bonus, especially as it's one of those games which goes for ridiculous prices on the secondary market, because there were only 800 or so copies released. With M2 having handled the PC Engine Mini, you can expect that results here are going to be pretty solid as well. I certainly found out the case here as, like with the Mega Drive titles, control was quite responsive, and even with the analog stick of the Pro Controller, I could play as well as I did when I was playing on my actual PC Engine and its gamepad. A handy benefit is that TurboFire is supported. It's conveniently mapped in such a way that allows you to either go for the level 2 or level 3 autofire, but pressing both fires at the same time. Very convenient feature. Visually, the scaling in the fit to screen mode feels smooth. Once again, I didn't really see any examples of shimmering here, which you might get on other hardware, so it checks off quite well on that front. An aspect which has been improved though is the number of sprites per line. It's more apparent with the bosses, because as your shots fly over them, you can see some flicker across sections of them in the original hardware footage. Now, compared to other types of sprite flicker seen, say for example Sagaya on the Master System, it's not that distracting, it's pretty minor all up, but it's nice to see the enhancements were made to remove it with the emulation used here. As for the sound, the more sampled nature of how the PC Engine's audio works really means that things are quite consistent between the original hardware and the provided emulation. Again, these two are great titles to include, and Alpha is a big bonus, especially with its boss rush mechanics and even the score attack that it offers. Finally, we're going to be looking at Darius Twin and Supernova for the Super NES. Unlike the other two systems, the Super NES wasn't really a machine best suited for shooters, which of course makes for interesting times when these two games are included in the pack. So talking about the emulation, visually the results are great. In fact, it feels a little more vibrant than from my original hardware, and once again, fit to screen keeps it scrolling smoothly and doesn't really have any sense of shimmering among the visuals. One touch I love is that they did increase the number of sprites per line, or added some special handling for it, because we could see it with this particular mini-boss in Darius Twin. On original hardware, the projectile attacks mask out part of the main sprite, but with the emulation here, things look as they should. Now, it is a minor detail, but it's one which is a genuine improvement for clarity, and honestly is quite appreciated for sure. The audio comes over well. Again, this is really a benefit to how the Super NES handles its audio with the SPC chip. And really, I can't complain about the quality. It's clear, the stereo comes out very nicely, and because it doesn't rely on FM synthesis, the consistency is more or less there. As for the controls, this is where I felt things were not quite up to par compared with the other emulations on offer. My experience was that playing with the analog stick of the Pro Controller, it felt far less responsive than it did with Sagaia on the Mega Drive or the two titles on PC Engine. It really threw me off when I was playing, and I did wonder if it was just down to the Pro Controller, at least initially, because I did find switching to a wired arcade stick provided the same effect when docked. Funnily enough, going for handheld mode, the experience felt far more playable and far more responsive, even using the analog sticks provided as part of the Joy-Cons. This is a bit of a unique experience to find these games more playable in handheld than docked, but that of course could really be my own sensitivity to lag more than anything. It might feel different for you when playing, and it's still, something not worth discounting completely. So this one's really you might want to try it for yourself. And that's pretty much the wrap. As I said when starting out, this isn't really a review of the collection per se, just a little poking about and talking about some of the experiences I had with the games included, and really trying to just answer some of my own curiosities with how these emulated versions compare to original hardware. Doing a full exploration of the pack, I didn't feel was worth it, simply as these have been out for quite a while digitally, and other folks out there have already covered both reviews of those compilations, and others have explored the physical collector's edition in their own way. I've also not really had a chance to sit down yet with the arcade side of the collection, and whilst I obviously couldn't explore those and perform comparisons like I've done with this video, if there was interest, I would be happy to take a look at those versions of the games as well. So, it's time to wrap things up for yet another video. If you enjoyed this one, please consider hitting the thumbs up button, and consider letting your friends know as well. Word of mouth is both incredibly helpful for getting the word out there on small channels like this, and greatly appreciated as well. For more chilled explorations of interesting games on classic systems, consider hitting the subscribe button if you've not already. Plus, of course, hitting the bell. Then sit back and wait for more videos like this to reach your subscription feed. A shout out as always goes to the channel supporters over on Patreon. It's their support more than anything which helps make this channel possible. And if you want to join them in helping support what I do here, then do check the links in the description. Most importantly though, thank you for taking another voyage beyond the Scanlines.